7:26. Now, the government in Denmark is looking at new legislation to ban burqas to address what they're calling parallel societies.
Denmark first introduced a burqa ban in 2018, and now even stricter rules are going to apply across schools and universities.
So we're asking this morning, should Britain follow in Denmark's footsteps?
Well, joining us now to debate this, Jacob Williams, Head of Domestic Policy at Pickthall House, and broadcaster Fahima Mohamed. A very good morning to both of you. Right, where do we start with this? Let's talk to Jacob, because I think you support a ban on the burqa.
Yeah, so as a British Muslim, we think this is a proportional measure. First of all, we point out that the burqa is only worn by a very, very small number of people, that it's not regarded by the vast majority of Muslims as a core religious practice. So the ban would only affect a very small number of people. And there is a proportionate reason to want to restrict wearing the burqa in public, which is that our society does run on facial recognition. It runs on recognizing the dignity of each individual and the personality of each individual, which requires them to be facially recognizable. There are obvious practical issues around security with face coverings of all kinds as well. So on the whole, we think it's a sensible measure, but we distinguish this very, very carefully from the hijab, the hair covering, which is totally different, which is a potentially thoroughly British garment. The late Queen wore a similar hair covering. It's not abnormal to cover your hair in public. It's just a modest practice that some individuals choose. And that's a core freedom that should be protected. The burqa, the face covering, is very different, and there are good reasons to want to restrict it in public.
I mean, that's a very reasonable argument, isn't it, Fahima?
Well, I think different countries make different choices based on their own constitutional values. Even France has a strong tradition of laïcité, which is the state secularism, whereas Britain has traditional prioritized, freedom of religion and individual liberty. The fact that another country has chosen to ban doesn't automatically mean it's right for the UK. And when it comes to schools, they already have uniform policies, and they can require clothing that supports safety, identification, communication, and learning. That's very different from banning what adults wear in every public place. Even universities set proportionate rules where identification is necessary for exams, laboratories, clinical placements or security. So again, but universities are also a place of adult learning and free expression. So any restriction should be specific and justified, not blanket prohibitions. Now, if your concern is education or identity, then make rules for those settings. Why extend it to someone who's walking down the street, shopping, or taking their children to school? There's a difference between the rule for a specific place and giving the government the power to dictate what adults can wear everywhere. There is definitely security. I mean, the question isn't whether you like the burqa. The question is whether the state should have the power to tell peaceful women what they can and cannot wear. And Britain has always balanced liberty and security with security. Wherever there's identification needed in airports, courts, banks, schools, or during police interactions, the law already allows for faces to be uncovered. A blanket ban would be disproportionate between a sort of legality, contentiousness, as well as, risking targeting a tiny minority while creating bigger problems for community cohesion and individual freedoms.
All right, Fahima, you make a very good point. Jacob?
Sure. So I respond to that by saying that, of course, liberty and religious liberty especially are fundamental British values and are extremely important. But this doesn't give you an absolute right to wear what you want in public. We often just forget the fact it's illegal to be naked in public. There is such a thing as public decency. We have standards about what you can wear in public. It's not totalitarian to tell people they can't cover their face in public either. And sure, you can have particular rules in security situations. But you mentioned social cohesion. One of the issues with the burqa is when an individual can't be publicly recognized, they're not really part of the wider community that they're supposedly taking part in public. Their individuality is obscured, and that's a good reason to want to restrict this particular practice.
Fahima.
I think where there is certain professions or settings, visibility is required, but a blanket ban, again, especially in public spaces, is not necessarily needed. And it does go against sort of the human rights and Article 9 of the ECHR, which, of course, needs to be lawful, necessary, and proportionate. I mean, at the end of the day, we're also targeting a small minority of women who are not the ones that are sort of criminal. They're not the ones that cause antisocial behavior. There is much more that is required in criminal justice that we should should be, focusing on.
All right, Fahima, and you do make a very valid point. However, David's just come up with a good point, where it's about tolerances and all the rest of it. He says it's nothing to do with religion or culture. It's the subjugation of women which should not be tolerated here, and there is an argument on that has to be looked at, doesn't it? These women are they choosing to wear a burqa? Are they being forced by family or husbands to wear a burqa? Is it subjugation? It must be in some cases.
Well, whether or not that is, when we talk about women oppression, the burqa, at the end of the day, if women are forced to wear it, then their coercion is already illegal. And the answer is protecting women from that, not criminalizing women who choose to wear it. I personally have hosted and sort of interviewed various women, especially revert women, who choose to wear the hijab and the actual burqa, which covers their faces. So there is a choice in the UK which allows women to dress how they want. And like I said, we have much more criminal activity from places and people that we should be focusing on than minority of women that do not cause any harm to society except for choosing to dress more modestly according to their own values and belief. And Muslims are not a monolith. They have different interpretations of how they actually believe. So you cannot have a blanket understanding of Islam either for every single individual woman.
A final response from you, Jacob, on that point.
Well, I agree with much of that. And of course, it's true that there are disagreements among Muslims about things like the burqa and indeed the hijab, and that's completely fine. But I would just say that one of the issues with saying, well, just if someone's forcing you to wear the burqa, then ban that, is, of course, we have laws against this already. Denmark's talking about parallel societies. When you have societies that have their own very, very dense social norms, very, very strong family and communal ties, that often are newly arrived and not fully integrated, it's quite difficult to ever enforce the law in potentially private interactions.
But even there's also evidence to show that even after these bans that have been put in France as well as in Denmark, it has not created more integration. If anything, it's created more sort of separation, because again, the focus and the target is against a small minority of people. If there is evidence of that integration, there is none. And that is not really showing anything.
OK, we've got to leave it there very, very quickly, because I did say final word from Jacob very quickly.
The fundamental issue is you can't be integrated if you're not visible in public. It just symbolises a radical separation from society, and that's the reason we should.
Well, then talk about.
OK, no, we leave it there. Thank you so much, though. A very, very lively debate on that one.